Hello, my name is Brendan Ahern. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Crane Shares Exchange Traded Funds. Today I'm joined by Crane Shares Portfolio Manager Mark Schlarbaum. Mark and I will provide an overview of the potential benefits of an all-China exposure to the new China economy. We partnered with Zacks Index Services to create the Crane Shares Zacks New China ETF, listed on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker KFYP. We believe one of the things that makes KFYP special is its all-China exposure. According to Bloomberg, as of June 30th, 2016, KFYP is actually the first exchange-traded fund globally to physically hold Chinese stocks listed on the Shanghai, Hong Kong, New York, and NASDAQ exchanges. Our selection of securities is based on what we believe to be the most important economic document in China today, the 5-year plan. Utilizing a smart beta methodology developed by Zacks Index Services, we apply a fundamental and technical screen to identify securities that we believe will benefit from their inclusion and exposure to the 5-year plan. For those of you who may not be familiar with Crane Shares Exchange Traded Funds, our firm was founded based on the experience of our Chief Executive Officer, John Crane, during his time spent living in China. John realized that many China-focused funds in the United States were underallocated to the growth segments of China's economy and capital markets. At the same time, he saw how China was opening up its mainland equity and fixed income markets to allow increased access for international investors. Today, Crane Shares provides both exposure to the growth segments of China's economy and access to China's mainland equity and fixed income markets, ahead of their potential inclusion into broader indices. Today, Mark and I will be providing an overview of how China has historically been underweight in older indices, an overview of the 5-year plan, and how it affects China's economy, and finally, an outline of how, together with Zacks Index Services, we developed the Crane Shares Zacks New China ETF, ticker KFYP. So let's dive right in. Historically, when investors said we're invested in China, they actually only meant a small subset of Chinese securities. Our pie chart here shows the MSCI All China Index, which includes mainland, Hong Kong, and US listed Chinese companies. The largest slice of this pie chart, the mainland A-share market, or Shanghai and Shenzhen listed companies, has been excluded from most popular Chinese indices due to access limitations. The exclusion of mainland A-share stocks means that actively managed mutual funds, as well as exchange-traded funds, typically only provide exposure to a very small subset of China's market, the Hong Kong-listed companies. Only recently, this definition expanded slightly to include U.S. Chinese companies. We wanted to create a fund that offered investors a more complete exposure to China's markets. In partnership with Zacks, we were able to provide an all-China exposure. As we mentioned before, KFYP holds mainland-listed A-shares, Hong Kong-listed H-shares, and New York and NASDAQ-listed N-shares. This is very different from how older China indices provide exposure. In fact, when you look at their constituents, they are only investing in a very limited number of securities. For example, the MSCI China Index only invests in about 150 companies, equating to only about 6% of the entire China equity universe. Another broad measure of China, the FTSE 50 Index, only provides 0.2% exposure to all listed Chinese companies. We believe that this provides a poor representation of China for investors. Again, our partnership with Zacks provides the only ETF globally with an all-China exposure through directly holding Chinese companies on the Shanghai, Hong Kong, New York, and NASDAQ stock exchanges. One of the potential benefits of the mainland A-shares market is its lack of correlation to other global equity markets. Correlation is a financial measure showing how investment vehicles move in tandem with or against one another. Stocks with a measure of 0.7 or more are typically considered to be highly correlated. In the table below, we have a group of MSCI indices, specifically the MSCI All Country World Index, MSCI EAFE, a broad measure of developed markets including Europe, Japan, Australia, MSCI Emerging Markets, USA, China, and again, this is the MSCI China Index, which is predominantly Hong Kong and US listed companies with none of the A-share market, frontier markets, as well as China A, the mainland market. As you can see, the China A-share market has a very low correlation to other indices. The typical U.S. investor very likely has exposure to these common benchmarks within their portfolio today. Yet exposure to the A-share market, which has the lowest correlation, is much less common. I can't think of a better example than what happened yesterday, Tuesday, August the 2nd. Yesterday, according to Bloomberg, Asian equities were down across the board along with European and U.S. equities. Virtually every major stock exchange globally was down yesterday. Yet, the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock markets were up. Through holding China A shares yesterday, investors would have seen the potential benefit of their low correlation in their portfolios. Again, this low correlation is predominantly due to the limited ability of international investors to access the mainland market. While the barriers that historically prevented investors from accessing the mainland markets are starting to fade, a topic that Mark will delve into further in the presentation, it's important to recognize the mainland A-share market, which as of June 30th, 2016, represents 36.5% of KFYP, really does beat to its own drum. So let's dive into the 5-year plan. As I mentioned earlier, we believe the 5-year plan is the most important document in China because it represents China's economic and societal blueprint. All departments and agencies within the Chinese government come together to articulate what their goals are and to form a game plan for achieving these goals. The result of their efforts are summarized in the 5-year plan. Over the course of the next 5-year period, there are meetings called plenums, where these agencies and departments within China's government come together on a regular basis to assess how they are doing versus their game plan. The 5-year plan is a measure of accountability that addresses in practical terms what needs to be done to achieve these goals. China's current plan, the 13th 5-year plan, falls under the leadership and purview of President Xi. The issuance of the new plan coincided with the culmination of President Xi's first term as he prepares to enter his second term. The new 5-year plan falls firmly under his guidance. President Xi, in his current position, has earned the reputation of being a reformer. It is our belief here at CraneShares that President Xi may be deemed as one of the most important leaders of modern China. The 13th 5-year plan, which was ratified this past March, is President Xi's game plan, his economic as well as societal blueprint. One item within the latest 5-year plan that made a lot of headlines here in the United States was the abolishment of the one-child policy. While this major policy change grabbed headlines, there are also other areas that are equally as significant. Within the broader openness tenet, you may have read a little bit about the One Belt, One Road policy. One Belt, One Road is about China recreating the old Silk Road connecting China via land and by sea with Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. This policy will allow enhanced transportation of China's manufactured goods to these markets. Certainly, it also allows for the import of goods from those markets into China as well. Regarding this openness tenet, you may have heard a little bit about the Shanghai-Hong Kong Stock Connect, which allows investors for the first time to gain access to the Shanghai Stock Exchange listed companies without any sort of quota program. This is an important item for our business, which again, Mark will speak to later. I just want to touch base on the innovation tenet. This is an area that we hold very closely as investors. There's been a number of ways that China is looking to move up the market. They want to move away from low-cost manufacturing. That leads us to another program you may have read a little bit about. It's called Made in China 2025 program. This is where China endeavors to move upscale into the production of, say, trains and planes that really compete on a global basis, and not just in terms of low-cost manufacturing. There's also the Internet Plus policy, which can really be viewed as an Internet of Things policy that aims to integrate technology into more traditional manufacturing sectors, while at the same time incorporating the Internet more thoroughly into broader society. I was in China about a month ago. Actually, Mark was in China just a few weeks ago, and one of the things that stood out was how ubiquitous Wi-Fi connection is there. You can access free public Wi-Fi in most malls, restaurants, and train stations. This coverage is constantly expanding. And why is that? Because it's an aspiration. It's a goal within the latest 5-year plan. I think you can start to see how intuitively, as investors, we were able to read the 5-year plan and start making connections with potential investment opportunities. As we developed KFYP, we took the 5-year plan and its tenets and started connecting the dots. For example, you can take something like insurance. Why is insurance important? Well, in China today, domestic consumption, which according to the National Bureau of Statistics represents over 50% of GDP, is very important to the government's plans to reduce dependency on international demand for manufactured goods. One factor that is currently inhibiting this goal is actually China's very high household savings rate. One of the reasons Chinese people save so much is because healthcare is expensive and healthcare insurance is limited. So in the event of a health issue, they have to tap into their savings. Greater health insurance coverage reduces the need to save as much, which could free up money to bolster domestic consumption. This is just one example, but I think it helps to highlight the reason why, when we read the 5-year plan as investors, we start getting really excited. One of the things that we developed in partnership with the investment professionals at Zacks Index Services is a quantitative approach to making this connection. So as we look at insurance, for instance, we know we don't want to hold the entire financial sector. We only want to hold insurance companies. We know healthcare is important along with insurance, so we certainly want to hold these companies. We know pollution is an issue that the government is very keen on tackling, but we don't want to hold all utilities. We only want to hold the utility companies that are in renewable energy. Zacks' expertise from an indexing perspective allowed us to develop an intuitive filter to limit our exposure to the sectors and companies within those sectors, who we believe are most likely to benefit from the 5-year plan. Some of the companies that we hold within KFYP today are probably not household names here in the United States, but they offer important services. For example, think about the abolishment of the one-child policy. Who are the types of companies that we believe are going to benefit from that? Inner Mongolia Yili Group provides dairy milk. Think about all the new mothers who are going to need to provide formula for their babies in the future. This industry is something we are watching. I think you'd agree with that in terms of insurance. China Pacific Insurance Group may be a great beneficiary of the push toward increased domestic consumption, as well as Sinopharm within the healthcare sector. Sinopharm is a pharmaceutical distribution company that we believe may benefit as China builds out its healthcare infrastructure. We are very excited about the range of companies KFYP holds. But again, we built this fund in partnership with Zacks Index Services to take the emotion out of it and only select our holdings through a quantitative measure. So we wanted a smarter approach. We talked a little bit about the utility sector. You can see we are actually overweight utilities relative to other benchmarks. But what's different is we hold renewable energy companies in China. We do not hold the coal-fired electrical utilities. The end output is that we have a very different exposure to China than other funds and indices. As you saw before, we not only hold these Chinese companies regardless of where they list, but we also have a filter to make sure that they're in these favorite sectors outlined by the 5-year plan. So just to recap, we've taken an all-China approach with a quantitative filtering down by sector, which is very important to the fund strategy. At this juncture, I want to hand the presentation over to our portfolio manager, Mark Schlarbaum, who will walk you through the details of how the quantitative strategy works.
Hey Brendan, thank you very much for having me. It's so exciting to be here, and I'm extremely excited to discuss the portfolio construction of KFYP. Our differentiated approach really begins when we include all the investable universe of China stocks, which we believe distinguishes us from some of our competitors. We include mainland stocks, which Brendan has already referred to as the A shares. We include the Hong Kong stocks, and we also include US listed Chinese companies on the NASDAQ and New York stock exchanges. Next, we have a general narrowing process from this all-inclusive China universe. We apply a stock liquidity screen to make sure that these stocks are very liquid and trade millions of shares per day. Next, we apply a 5-year plan sector screen to make sure that we are invested alongside the Chinese government and maintaining consistent exposure to China's economic blueprint. Again, I cannot overemphasize how important the Chinese 5-year plan is. We really want to take advantage of that and look at ourselves as co-investing with the Chinese government, being on the same side of the table, to really take advantage of the economic tailwind and potentially benefit from the huge amounts of money they are already investing into these sectors. After that general narrowing process, we then go through and apply a factor analysis, which includes fundamental value and technical analysis. Our fundamental work looks at cash flow and free cash flow as a value measure. We then do technical analysis, which uses a 3-month momentum and 6-month volatility measure. We end up with 40 stocks, which we feel are the strongest stocks and are most likely to produce alpha over the years to come. Just to share a personal anecdote about our approach, I've been a small cap trader and portfolio manager most of my career prior to coming to KraneShares. These two factors, fundamental and value, sometimes also referred to as momentum and value, provided great outperformance to the general market in the US during the early 90s to mid 2000s. Right now, like the US market in the 90s, the mainland Chinese market is comprised primarily of retail investors, about 80% retail to be exact. We feel over time, as part of the 5-year plan, this is going to change as international investors are granted more access and thus more and more institutional money comes into the market. However, we feel like we're still in the early stages of the institutionalization of the mainland market to a degree like what we have here in the United States. This makes a smart beta approach to investing in China seem like a particularly attractive strategy. Delving a little deeper into KFYP's index characteristics, we can see it is a very focused basket limited to 40 constituents. At the same time, it has broad exposure not only across the exchanges where Chinese companies list, but also across market capitalizations, with the largest market cap stock at $213 billion and the smallest at $174 million, and the weighted average market cap at $19.7 billion. We think Zacks Index Services has done a great job of creating this very diverse yet focused basket. As a portfolio manager of KFYP, one of the ways I am able to make this index work as a fund is through trading Shanghai-listed stocks through the Shanghai Hong Kong Stock Connect program. This program allows us to invest directly into the mainland A-share market. I was just recently in Shanghai visiting the Shanghai Stock Exchange, and there's so much excitement and buzz about the Stock Connect programs there, which plays into the government's goal within the 5-year plan to continue opening up its capital markets. The last thing I'd like to take a look at is the fund's performance here. Again, we are really excited to be a partner with Zacks Index Services, and you can find further performance of the Zacks New China Index on their website, which is www.zacksindexservices.com. Now I'd like to turn the presentation back over to Brendan for him to summarize.
Thank you, Mark. Ultimately, I believe that the KraneShares Zacks New China ETF is a compelling product in the marketplace, as well as a very intuitive and logical way to approach China as an investor. First and foremost, we look at Chinese stocks regardless of where they invest: Shanghai, Hong Kong, New York, and NASDAQ exchanges. Through our firm's focus on China, we know how important, how vital the 5-year plan is to their society. We believe it is a logical investment strategy in the companies and stocks that are aligned with China's blueprint. We are really sitting alongside policymakers as an investment strategy, which we believe, again, is very intuitive. We employ a proprietary multi-factor smart beta methodology screen provided by Zacks Index Services, which we believe does an exceptional job of filtering through this universe to find the companies with the highest risk-reward characteristics in our favor. It has been our pleasure working with Zacks to come up with KFYP's strategy. The investment professionals at Zacks certainly have become our friends over the course of the last year we spent developing the benchmark together. And certainly we know that the policy of hiring good people really flows from the top. That speaks volumes about Mr. Zacks and the company he's helped build. Ultimately, China is going to occupy a bigger and bigger role within the global economy and capital markets. We believe that the 5-year plan is a very intuitive and logical guide to investing in China today. Thank you again, and please do not hesitate to reach out if there's any further questions. Thank you.